So let's get started here. I have about, I think 9 or 10 slides. I really want to give you the opportunity to ask questions and have a conversation. I know a lot of good questions have already been asked, and we can touch on those as well as anything new that you want to talk about. So let me find, oh, here it is. So I start off most presentations just to give you a reminder of who we are. I know you all are very familiar with your own co-op territory, but again, this is our statewide structure in Ohio. The footprint of all the electric co-ops across Ohio are 25 members. I think you all know we serve about 1 million Ohio residents. Our peak load is just over 1,900 megawatts. That was set during, I think, the last winter storm, Elliott, I think they called, over the Christmas weekend in 2022. Similar to what we saw a couple weeks ago, just I think a bit more wind. Kevin, really did a good overview of our existing resources, our Cardinal plant, our 18% ownership of OVEC in the Kiger Creek and the Clifty Creek station, our 2 natural gas power plants with backup fuel oil, and then our renewables. And again, I always like to talk about our renewables and especially the hydroelectric entitlements that we have coming out of New York. The Robert Moses hydroelectric facility just north of Buffalo. If you haven't had a chance to visit there, they have a really good visitor center. I would highly recommend that. Some other hydroelectric facilities along the St. Lawrence Riverway that we have an entitlement to as well. A number of PPAs, a couple of these landfill generators that have been really fantastic. I'll call them baseload resources even though they're small, 4 or 5 megawatts, but they run all the time. So they're proven facilities. They do a great job, and it's been a really good benefit for us. And then about our community solar, our solar program. We have, I believe, 23 small sites across the state. We have a 2 megawatt facility up in Hancock Wood territory. Just east of Findlay is our big community solar project. And we'll see if we expand that in the future, right? We've always talked about expanding renewable at the pace of interest of your members, and we'll continue to do that. And then total employees, 365 about. Most of those are at the Cardinal plant. Bethany said about 260-ish. So employees at Cardinal, and the rest of us are at the statewide headquarters, at the Moan and Greenville plants, and up at our Colt training facility. So before we look ahead, let's do a quick review of really what we experienced over the course of 2025 and even beyond that, the highlights. So starting with our statewide services, again, our statewide group under Doug's leadership continues to do a fantastic job. We start with our highest priority of safety and providing you the training and the education you need for security. Dwight Miller, you all know, has established a fantastic organization. And really, it starts with the culture that's been created. I think you all know that Dwight will be retiring this summer. We had a lead instructor at Colt, Chris Napier, who has been named as Dwight's replacement. Expect big things out of Chris. Great guy, very knowledgeable. I think we're going to be able to retain and maintain the level of safety training that Dwight has provided under Chris's leadership, so we look forward to that. Our government affairs group, a lot of talk, a lot of activity in the regulatory world, the legislature in Ohio, the legislature at the federal level, a lot of activities. Really led by Doug and Mark Armstrong, Kelly Barr. They do a lot of work. All of you have been fully engaged across 2025, a lot of activity at the state level. That will just continue, right? There's a lot of change in the industry right now, and so I can't expect that the level of activity at the Ohio legislative level or even at the federal level is going to change. Our communications group continues to do a great job. Member engagement, programs like this on, director training, employee training. I went to a Leadership Edge graduation a couple weeks ago. It's a fantastic program. We're still seeing really quality staff members go through that are the future leaders of the statewide network. So I think we're really in good hands now and into the future. I think we have a lot of solid, knowledgeable and solid and just well-respected folks that will be stepping into leadership roles over the next 10, 20 years. So we're really in a good place at the statewide level and with every expectation that we're going to continue providing those services. Great financial results for Buckeye, the G&T. Our G&T rates compared, again, it's not a mission or a focus necessarily, but it's important to you all to have competitive G&T rates. And because of a lot of the volatility and disruption in the industry, Buckeye continues to have, excuse me, the lowest G&T rates compared to the IOUs in Ohio. So that's a good place to be. Our existing generation facilities really provides or allows for that to happen. It's because we have existing facilities, we know what they cost, we have low fuel prices, and that translates into lower G rates. And then the transmission cost, of course, we're going to be talking about that. Those continue to be challenging. We're seeing better service, but it's coming at a cost. And again, improved financial strength and flexibility. A big focus of ours over the course of 2025 was really positioning Buckeye to be in a position where it could respond in a very volatile wholesale market that we participate in. And so by cleaning up our balance sheet, cleaning up and increasing our lines of credit, we have positioned Buckeye from a risk management perspective to be an active participant in the wholesale market, but also to be able to do that and absorb some of the volatility that we see at the PJM level. A lot of positive regulatory trends. Because we are coal plant owner operators, we really care about what the EPA is doing. We've talked a lot about what the EPA did in 2024 and the rules that were released with the clear intention of really shutting coal plants down and minimizing the use of natural gas. If you think of where we would be if those rules were not being challenged right now, I believe to have carbon capture and sequestration in operation and being used by the end of 2031 was basically impossible. So we would be in the middle of even more legal challenges right now if those rules were expected to remain in place. So we've seen positive trends from the US EPA over the last year, repealing and revising some of these rules. And it gives us, I think, more importantly, certainty, or at least some amount of certainty that we can continue operating the facilities that have provided so much value to date. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they have become very active, primarily because of the data center activity across the country, but also because of the amount of transmission that's being built and the concerns about resource adequacy and not having enough power generation available to serve the load. So they've been very active in the rulemaking space. We have been active in the regulatory process to try to help influence those rules. And that filters down into PJM, which is under FERC jurisdiction. PJM, it's been, we've been inside PJM now for about 20 years, and the number of rule changes that we've seen has just been, it's hard to really understand how much has changed over the last 20 years. And the fact that we're just accelerating the pace of change within PJM, it makes it hard to understand or comprehend. But again, we're very active. We're trying to influence the rulemaking process to make sure we have rules in place where we can continue to operate like we do now, providing affordable, reliable, stable rates. Talked about transmission reliability. It's improving. We've seen that over the last couple of years. We expect that to continue absent some kind of abnormally strong weather event, but it's coming at a cost. If you look at the last 10, 15 years, our transmission rates have doubled, tripled, or quadrupled in some areas. And we're trying to be part of I think the resistance to that, recognizing that we do need to make investments to make the grid more reliable. So we're going to continue to be active there. And then data centers, data centers, data centers. And every conversation I have, every event we go to, every conference, data centers dominates the conversation. And I can understand why. The industry has never really had to respond to this kind of a change this quickly. It's important to us, it's important to the industry. And like a lot of things, the pace of development happens faster than the pace of government and the pace of regulations. And that's what we've seen over the last year. We started noticing the concerns back in 2023, 2024, and we as participants in this industry could identify that and say, we need to do this, this, or that. Well, the regulators move at the pace of government, and so that often takes 2-3 years, and that's exactly what we've seen. But I think they've caught up and they've recognized and they appreciate the concerns of increasing the amount of load on the grid without a corresponding amount of new generation. So that's a good thing, but as you all know, whenever you have the government getting more involved into your business, that also creates unintended consequences. So we're trying to be as active as we can in that process to make sure whatever rules are promulgated down, it fits with our business model, allows us to continue to do what we do. I have a lot of confidence in the Buckeye and the statewide staff. You know, I expect, and I think we all expect, a lot of collaboration, a positive work culture, a positive environment for people to make contributions. And that's what I try to set at the statewide, and I think it's what you all try to set at your co-ops. And it is very helpful when there's this amount of industry change that's happening, right? We all try to protect and defend against silos and try to prevent those from happening. I think we've done that at I think we've done a good job at the statewide level to minimize that from happening. We have a lot of engagement with your staff at the distribution co-op level, a lot of interdepartment collaboration at Buckeye, and it's really allowed us, I think, to be a pretty effective staff without having too many people, right? I think we have a narrow or a small amount of staff for the amount of work that we're doing. That expectation will continue just because, you know, we're in the middle of the sausage making right now. There's still a lot of rules that will be promulgated, and we want to be part of that rulemaking process. And the last point, updated strategic priorities and organizational improvements. I know the Buckeye and the OREC board heard plenty from me throughout the course of 2025. We worked very closely with both boards, closely with the committees to, I would say, refine our strategic priorities. I think it's a mini version of strategic planning that we conducted. We realigned the committee structure so that they aligned with each priority. So that meant getting rid of some committees that were maybe outdated or didn't have a full-time need, and consolidating some of those into new committees. And so I think we have a structure now that we can now proceed and effectively address all the challenges that we have, whether it's legislative, whether it's making sure we have the right member engagement and training programs for you all, whether it's working on transmission and transmission reliability and power supply. So I really feel good about what we've accomplished over the last year, and I feel even better about how we've set ourselves up for the future, and I think we will continue to be effective both at the statewide and the G&T levels. So, charging ahead. Again, I think Kevin or somebody mentioned about all these nice little titles that were created for each of our programs. I don't know if Doug or who came up with Charging Ahead, but I think AI may have helped him, and so thanks, Doug, for that jazzy title. So let's start with statewide services. As I said, and you all know, we all live by this, safety is our highest priority. And safety for us means providing the programs and the training to all of you and your staff so that you can effectively and safely carry out your objectives. Again, Dwight has done a great job, and Doug has done a great job of creating the culture to provide those services to all of you. and it's on us to maintain those going into the future. As Dwight retires, as Chris steps into his new role, we think very highly of Chris. I think he's going to be an effective leader. So I have every expectation that we'll be able to retain that high level of providing safety and safety services to all of you. Government affairs, regulatory engagement. Again, 2025 was as busy a year as I've seen since I've been working in the industry, some 30 years. And I don't expect that to change. So Ohio, we're very fortunate that for rate making, we are governed and regulated by the Buckeye board and by the OREC board, as you all are, directors of your distribution co-ops. But the state of Ohio has its challenges. And the challenges are directly impact us because we all share the grid. We care what happens in Ohio, even though we appreciate the fact that we can be self-governed and self-regulated. Ohio deregulated, 25 years ago, and we've talked about what that has meant in terms of rates and reliability in Ohio. And so I think we all know that Ohio is a net importer of electricity. And that's driven by the regulatory structure that was put in place 25 years ago, updated about 10 years ago, that really prohibits or prevents the investor-owned utilities of owning generation, and hoping that the PJM wholesale market drives and provides incentives to bring in investments for power generation. And we've seen some new generators built, a lot of coal plants retired for a number of reasons, but the PJM market was really never, I believe, constructed or able to provide the kind of resource adequacy that Ohioans should expect, and really any state operating within PJM. I think they've been sold a false bill of goods with the expectation that these wholesale markets will provide enough incentives to ensure that they have a reliable power grid and affordable and stable rates. So we're going to continue to stay active in that arena to, again, influence rules as much as we can, while at the same time trying to keep arm's distance to allow us to continue managing our businesses as we see fit, and again, try to influence things for I think, positive outcomes for the power grid. Supporting economic development, I think a lot of you know that our former Director of Economic Development, Dennis Mignard, recently retired. Kelly Barr with our Government Affairs group will be taking on a hybrid role to help drive the economic development support that you all need from the statewide level into the future. So we look forward to that. And right now, when you talk economic development, everything seems to go back to data centers, and I understand that there's a lot of expectations for data centers and providing economic stimulus and economic benefits to communities, whether it's a tax base, whether it's a job base. I think the long-term return on data center remains to be seen. I haven't really settled on a firm opinion on what that means yet. I have some concerns, but hopefully as we see continued data center development, especially in the co-op territory, we find a way that they can benefit your communities, they can be served reliably, they can be served with affordable rates, and they don't create any other concerns or issues with our existing membership. Continuing to communicate the co-op difference, our communications group does a fantastic job with our magazine. We're expanding our digital presence. We're working closely with a lot of your communication staff, and I expect that to continue going forward. And then education and training. I mentioned Leadership Edge. We have the suite of leadership programs that the membership engagement group under Missy's leadership produces and provides. We have great outside folks that support those programs, and I expect those to continue to be well supported by you all, and we're always open for comments and feedback as to how those programs might need to change and how we can adapt going forward. So let's talk data centers. Kevin touched on a lot of this, but it really goes back a couple years ago when the data center load was starting to come online, and we were starting to see load projections that we knew inside the industry could not be reliably served, knowing that the pace of new generation development is slower than the pace of new hyperscale loads, and knowing that the regulatory structure did not exist to allow for new generators to come online at the same pace as new data center load. Ohio is a deregulated state, so there's no direct, if you have this much load, you should build this much generation. In Ohio and several other deregulated states is you don't control how much load is coming on, and you have no consideration for the generation side. You just hope the magic market provides some incentive for outside companies to come in and build new generation. And that's what we were living with, continue to live with, but we think there are going to be some changes coming down the road. We talked about the amount of new loads expected in PJM. You know, going up to close to 200,000 megawatts over the next 4 or 5 years, over 200,000 megawatts by 2035, the next 10 years. As a comparison, the cold weather we just went through in PJM was about 140,000 megawatts of peak load. There were some school closings and other closings, but it just helps you appreciate how much load they're saying is going to come on the system with an uncertain amount of generation that will serve that. And that's what we're trying to solve right now and try to prevent problems. I talked about the pace of government. Well, now, you know, the White House is involved. The governors across PJM are involved. FERC is involved. They've issued joint statements saying, okay, we recognize the problem now. We're going to direct PJM. And again, to remind, you know, people who PJM is or what PJM is, it's the grid operator for 13 states. That includes Ohio, Pennsylvania, the Mid-Atlantic region, and it pretty much matches up with the circle I have up there. So that's, when we talk PJM, that is PJM. They're the grid operator for the region that includes Ohio and all of the other states in that region. So they're all involved, and they've told PJM, you need to write some rules, you need to figure this out, recognizing that new power plant development has typically been a state responsibility. But then you have to say, well, the states deregulated and they pointed to PJM, so we have this circular issue where PJM said, well, the states, you're responsible for power generation, and the states say, PJM, you're responsible for power generation. So they're trying to write some new rules to make this all work. We talk a lot about data centers, load projections. You know, at the same time, a lot of you all are talking with data centers that want to locate in your territory. We have over 5,000 megawatts of data center study requests that want to interconnect to the transmission grid in your cooperative territory. That load is not included in any of these projections, and it remains to be seen if we reach the stage where these data center developers actually want to proceed and move forward, and then we'll start to inform the transmission owners and PJM about these data centers, and then those data centers will be included in the projections. And then Kevin also touched on this new data center tariff. And so going back over a year ago, working with our rate committee, with our board, we recognized because Buckeye has a single rate, and we had a threshold about how much load could be served under that rate before going back to the Buckeye board to have a discussion, recognizing that a lot of data centers were requesting to locate in co-op territory. We identified the need that, hey, you know, it's an industry best practice. Now that there's a concern about data centers, we should have a dedicated, specific way of allocating costs to data centers. And especially if you have existing generation, preserve that generation for our traditional existing members. Working over the course of 2025, we proposed a new data center tariff following other examples that other G&Ts, that other co-ops in other states were using. And then at our board meeting yesterday, that data center tariff was approved by the board. And so we'll begin implementing that as we have data centers that want to proceed in co-op territory. We will now develop power supply plans in a way where we can directly allocate any of those costs to the data center. Power generation. So resource planning has been a busy activity for us over the last year. It's really is not something that you pick up every 10 years and do. It's really an ongoing process. We essentially just I think, restored what has been done in the past, looking at our existing fleet, our existing portfolio, considering what we might do as we look out 5, 10, 15 years, at the same time planning for what we might need to do with data centers. So the plan really is invest and retain and maintain our existing resources. And in the Q&A, we can talk about what our actions and activities around Cardinal Unit 3 has been. But really, the most cost-effective power supply for us right now is our existing fleet. And as Kevin showed, we have sufficient resources to serve our existing members, non-data center members, and we have sufficient resources to continue serving those traditional co-op members for the foreseeable future at affordable rates, and we can serve it reliably. So we're going to continue to do that. But we're also going to plan for future generation, whether it's for data centers or whether it's just incremental additions that we need to do to serve existing members. For incremental additions, we've really, over the last year, 2 years, I think we have now had to consider the value, and we appreciate more the value of our existing sites in terms of being potential sites for expanding generation, whether it's Cardinal, whether we expanded gas capabilities there at our Moan plant, which is, again, as Kevin indicated, is if you triangulate, it has a transmission line, 345 kV volt line. It has a major interstate pipeline going right next to the plant. It's a obvious location for expansion, and we're looking at doing that as we need into the future. And for data centers, really, Kevin was spot on. The options are natural gas or natural gas. Is it a combined cycle? Is it a combustion turbine? Those are the most readily available. And especially when you look at how quickly you need generation, those are the types of technologies that you can build and expect to be online and producing in 5 to 7 years. Looking out into 2035, 2040, as we look to, I think, supplement our existing baseload resources, primarily Cardinal, combined cycle technology is the obvious choice. And it's almost the only choice, even though it is a fossil fuel. It does use a fossil fuel, and there's always going to be regulatory, environmental challenges with that. It still is the most cost-effective way of producing electricity. The other options are, Kevin touched on these. I've talked with several of you. There's been a lot of commentary, a lot of press coverage about nuclear generation over the last couple of years. And as we all know, press coverage does not equal action. And press coverage doesn't mean it's an affordable source that we can expect in the near term. We can appreciate what nuclear energy and nuclear generation provides now, and those resources were primarily built in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. Most recently, down in Georgia, Vogtle Units 3 and 4 were constructed. I think they were started back in 2006. I think the Units 3 and 4 went to commercial operation, I think in 2023, 2024, so almost a 20-year process. And I've concluded that whenever the discussion about nuclear generation comes up, the first response should be who's paying for it. Because as Georgia residents and co-op members are going to see, the amortization, really spreading out the cost of those new units to make their rates affordable, you've got to look out 80 or 90 years. So a lot of new generation, when you talk about, okay, how quickly can I amortize or spread these costs out, the discussion is usually, now 30 years is a good benchmark. Sometimes they say 20. The expectation maybe is, I thought that was me. It could be 40 years possibly, but nuclear units or nuclear technology is so expensive right now, I think it's going to be difficult, even though there's a lot of positivity around nuclear generation, to get a state regulator or any other private entity to pay for that nuclear generation. There's just too much risk, and especially when you look at what happened in Georgia, there's a lot of, I think, caution around approving a new nuclear resource. There's been a hope that, and the data centers have talked about, hey, we have the biggest balance sheets in the country, in the world. Google, Meta, Amazon, and the hope has been that they will fund a resurgence in nuclear generation. That remains to be seen. I think there's a couple SMR designs that have been approved by the NRC. I think there's 5 or 6 others that might be approved. That's going to take time to play out. There's a couple what I would call prototypes or pilots being built with SMRs. I hope they're successful. But for us to think about next generation technology, for us to say, should nuclear be part of the mix, I think that's a decision that's going to be probably 20 years out. I think it's extremely difficult for us to say we want to be part of the next nuclear resource in Ohio for whatever reason. What we acknowledge is it's expensive, but it provides a lot of baseload energy. It is expected to be operational for decades. It's going to be hard, and I hope to see the nuclear industry stand back up, but it's going to take time. And I think there's a lot of concern about the cost, and until there's a breakthrough, it's going to be combined cycles and combustion turbines. And then renewables and batteries, they play a small role. We have a chart of the cold weather a couple weeks ago in PJM, and during the coldest hour, or I say during the peak hour of the week, 94% of the electricity was provided from nuclear, coal, gas, natural gas, and oil. A little bit of solar, a little bit of wind, a little bit of batteries, but they're still minor players. And until the intermittency and the backup concerns are solved, I think they're going to continue to be a minor player, at least in the PJM footprint. Regulations and governments, I've touched on this. What is happening at the EPA over the last year has been very positive for us as operators of coal and natural gas facilities. There's ongoing litigation to reverse or repeal or revise the rules in 2024. We've really been focused on the greenhouse gas rule and the ELG, the effluent limitations guidelines rule, because of the impact that they have to the Cardinal plant in particular. We've seen a lot of positive action out of the EPA for the greenhouse gas rule, and also possibly challenging the endangerment finding. The ELG rule issued in 2024, Bethany showed the $36 million project that we're working on right now to put into commercial service at Cardinal, and that's to address the 2020 ELG rule. The Biden administration released an upgraded rule in 2024 that essentially would make that system that's not yet commercially in operation obsolete and require another potential $100 or $200 million investment in another technology to address the 2024 rule that we don't really think is technically viable or feasible at the Cardinal plant. So that's in the process of being challenged, and really success on both of those is critically important, not just to us, but really for the entire industry to be able to provide a reliable and affordable power grid. And then the data center conundrum, I've touched on that. It's taken a while for the regulators to catch up and recognize that, okay, our regulatory structure is not going to work to address the pace of new load coming onto the system. And the rules that we're going to see, I think it just supports what we've done with the DC tariff and having a dedicated process to allocate costs to data centers. That essentially is what the White House, what the governors, what FERC is asking for PJM to develop now. Transmission service, we're primarily transmission dependent. We have almost 400 delivery points across the system in the state, and so we care about how functional and how reliable the transmission grid is. We've talked about the improvements, but it's come at a pretty steep cost. And Ben Wilson and his team is fully engaged with all the transmission owners as much as you can be, trying to influence the planning that they're doing, influence the projects that they take on, and do it in a way that it benefits co-ops, but also fairly allocates costs. And the projects are done with economics in mind, right? Everything so that it's not gold-plated. Are they doing projects that make economic sense, provide reliability improvements, but they're not excessive? And that's our focus. I've touched a little bit on this, this whole regulatory structure between generation transmission. Back in the day in a state, you would have a commission or even a company like ours that would try to balance transmission and generation development. That doesn't really exist anymore, especially in deregulated states like Ohio, where PJM traditionally is responsible for managing the grid, working with the transmission owners to do transmission planning, and then generation development being done outside of that. And so that's been a problem and part of the reason why it's been so slow to respond to the pace of the new loads from the data centers. So again, we're going to be focused on transmission expansion, how are those costs being allocated, and really try to influence the rules around that. Financial strength and risk management, I talked about what we've done across 2025 to improve the financial position of Buckeye and the statewide. We'll continue to do that. And then risk management, we formed a risk management committee 10 years ago, and at the time it was dependent or primarily focused on just energy market risks. And we've expanded that committee and worked to expand that committee and the objectives of that committee over the last few years. And now it's really an entire organizational risk management focus. So we meet monthly to talk about all the risks that impact Buckeye and the co-op. So it's not just PJM, it's not just operations, it's financial risks, it's environmental risk, and we'll continue to do that and be focused on that going forward. And so my final thoughts before the Q&A, it really a wrap up of what I've already talked about. We want to be hyper-focused on supporting you and your mission of providing affordable and reliable and safe electricity to your members. And we want to stay focused on that and provide the services that help you all. And we're focused on affordable and reliable power. As we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of aspirational proclamations, whether it was about renewables, whether it was about different technologies, we don't need fossil fuels. And it helps to have a singular focus on, our members deserve affordable and reliable power, and that's what we're going to be focused on. The aspirational, we'll leave that to somebody else. That's good sometimes, but let's stay focused on what we have control of, and we're going to continue to do that. Fair cost allocation, we're always focused on that. And then remained engaged on the political and the regulatory fronts because of everything I've talked about, everything you heard today. There's so much activity happening, whether it's at PJM, within the state, at the federal level. We will be as participatory in that process as we can be, trying to influence those rules, looking for a fair and reasonable outcome for all of you. Yeah, I think it's been a great conference. Thanks to everyone who has taken the time to put these great presentations together, and thanks for all of you making your way to Columbus for this event. So thanks.